Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Morning, it's 9:30 on Tuesday the 19th of December. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce and Ellie Costello.
Iceland volcano erupts. A volcano has erupted in the southwest of Iceland after weeks of intense earthquake activity. Around 4,000 people have been evacuated from the area.
And Dame Esther Ranson has revealed she's joined assisted dying clinic Dignitas in Switzerland and will consider going there to end her life as she battles lung cancer.
Politicians' pay rise. MPs are set to receive a bigger pay rise hike than nurses and ambulance workers. The extra £6,000 would take their salary to over £92,000.
And at last, school trans guidance. The guidelines have been in the works since 2018. They're coming out today. There'll be no sanctions for teachers if a pupil's preferred pronouns are not used.
Well, do let us know what you think about that story, or indeed any stories that we are talking about this morning, especially assisted dying. Do you think there should be a free vote on that in Parliament? Do let us know, gbviews@gbnews.com. But first, let's get your news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Ellie, thank you very much and good morning. 9:31, this is the latest. Guidance for schools on how to manage children who may wish to change their gender will be published today. It's understood the Department of Education will advise schools to inform parents if their children say they'd like to change genders. There'll be no obligation to allow students to socially transition or to provide gender-neutral facilities. Teachers will also be given the choice to opt out of using a student's chosen pronoun if they have a good faith objection. The Stonewall charity says the guidance doesn't consider the needs of trans and gender-diverse youth. Council planning departments are expected to be put on notice today as the Housing Secretary cracks down on those accused of dragging their feet on new applications. Michael Gove will call out local authorities with a history of poor performance on building new homes, with a promise to intervene where there have been severe delays. It's understood that some councils will be given 3 months to improve or risk having their powers stripped and developments forced upon them. Labour described Mr Gove's plan as truly through the looking glass. The old model of accessing dental care in England is gone for good. That's the warning from a leading think tank. Most dentists are no longer taking on new NHS patients, with warnings the service is in decay and at its worst point in 75 years. According to the Nuffield Trust, spending on dental services has dropped by more than £500 million since 2015. It says the universal service is no longer offered by the NHS and recommends the government take some difficult decisions to ensure those most in need continue to receive basic care. Mining workers who went on strike in the 1980s could have their convictions overturned as part of a bill to be presented in Parliament today. Thousands of miners were arrested in 1984 and 1985 after they walked out in a dispute with Margaret Thatcher's government. Scotland has already pardoned all those who took part in the strike. Owen Thompson, who's an MP for the SNP, wants the law changed in England and Wales. And a large volcano is erupting in Iceland, spewing lava and ash into the night sky. The spectacle started in the north of Grindavik just after 10 o'clock last night, when 2.5-mile-long vents was ripped open. Iceland's government says it doesn't pose a threat to life. Thousands of people had already been evacuated from the area last month due to concerns over intense seismic activity. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now back to Andrew and Ellie.
Well, good morning to you. A huge volcano in southwest Iceland has erupted after weeks of intense activity. Iceland's Prime Minister has declared a state of national emergency.
Well, authorities had already evacuated 4,000 people from the area. They also closed the nearby Blue Lagoon geothermal spa, one of Iceland's most popular tourist attractions.
Well, joining us in the studio to explain all of this is the environmentalist Nathan Rao. Nathan, when we had a volcano of this magnitude back in 2010 in Iceland,
Yes.
it caused the biggest downing of flights in Europe since the Second World War.
It did.
Does this have the potential to do the same?
No. Now, what you were just talking to is the Eyjafjallajökull volcano, which
I'm
is...
glad you pronounced it.
I was going to hand that over to you, Andrew, but I thought I'd better grab that one myself.
Yeah.
That was not only a different type of volcano,
Right.
a different area, a different cap. It was also a different beast altogether. This volcano doesn't seem to be threatening to throw out a dust plume, a volcanic
Right.
ash plume, which was the problem that we saw in 2010. And as you mentioned, that caused the biggest shutdown in air traffic since World War II, because it lasted right through from January until May. I mean, April was when we were really starting to worry about it, but it spread all over Europe, this colossal ash cloud that meant you couldn't travel. This is slightly different. Now, the good news about this one is, even though it erupted really only a matter of hours ago, it's been rumbling for a few weeks, but only 10 o'clock last night, the Icelandic Met Office announced that they were going to watch this thing. It's going to blow, and it did. It is now, thankfully, the authorities saying seems to be de-intensifying slightly. So the initial panic of this, even though we can see these pictures, still spectacular pictures
aren't they?
of this
Amazing.
lava exploding. Yes, magnificent to watch it from afar. Absolutely terrifying if you're close to that. But thankfully, it seems that they will. I mean, it's very difficult to contain volcanic lava, but they don't think it's going to cause the impact. It pretty much isn't going to cause the impact that we saw in 2010. So fingers crossed.
Is this a fissure eruption or an explosive eruption? You will know the difference.
This has been a fissure eruption because we had a 3.5 kilometre fissure crack at the bottom of the volcano. That was volcanic earthquake activity, and that is what's causing this lava to flow. This is actually a volcano, so technically this is a volcano, but there is a fissure crack there as well. This is resting on the Eurasian and North American tectonic plates, this part of Iceland, so it is very volcanically active. This is why we go there, to have the hot springs and the lovely stuff that we enjoy. But the flip side of that, if we can have terrifying scenes like this erupt, as I said, from afar, beautiful to look at. And I mean, if you're living near this area, it's going to be scary for these people.
And what is happening for people who do live very close by? Because there is a fishing village about 2.5 miles from where this is exploding. So what's happened to them? Because there has been concerns, hasn't there?
Yes. Now, there has been an exclusion zone put around this thing, obviously, so people cannot go near it. But the authorities evacuated 4,000 people overnight away from the town and from this area, and they've also put an exclusion zone in there so you cannot go near it. They're watching it now to see how fast it's going to spread, because the lava is spreading southwest. Now, Grindavik is southwest to this volcano, which is on the Reykjanes Peninsula, about 40 kilometres from Reykjavik. It's about 40 kilometres from the airport, but we don't expect any sort of huge travel disruption so far. But the lava seems to be heading in a southwesterly direction, and that is going to be in the path of this fishing village. So again, the authorities are going to be looking at it. The president of Iceland has said that the priority is going to be preservation of life and preservation of infrastructure. They've downgraded that slightly to say there doesn't seem to be an immediate danger to life because of this now. As we can see, actually, traffic seems to be running around the area, so the Icelandics seem to be getting on with it. So in terms of what happens, it's a sit and wait and watch and see. But I think the initial panic that we had 5 hours ago about how destructive this was going to be may have eased a bit, which is good news.
Yeah, that's a relief, isn't it? Nathan Rao, environmental journalist. Very good to see you this morning.
Always lovely.
Thank you very much.
He talks with such passion about
He's
the subject,
very good.
doesn't
He loves the weather.
Yeah, he does.
Oh,
You're very good. Thank you, Nathan.
Now, Dame Esther Ranson, who I personally think is a national treasure, has revealed she's joined Dignitas, the assisted dying clinic in Switzerland, and she's considering going there, as she said, popping off to Zurich if the latest scan shows no improvement in her treatment for lung cancer.
Yes, the Childline founder and broadcaster who revealed earlier this year that her cancer had progressed to stage 4 said it was unexpected that she had made it to the Christmas period.
Well, joining us now is the Associate Editor of the Catholic Herald, Dr Gavin Ashenden. Dr Ashenden, good morning to you. You're a former chaplain to the Queen, if I can bring that into the conversation too. Many people hearing Dame Esther and reading her words today will think, there but for the grace of God, I would want the right to choose. She's sound in her mind. She knows what she wants. She doesn't want her children and close family to be subjected to having a long, drawn-out, painful illness. She wants the right to choose. She should be allowed that choice, shouldn't she?
I'm very sympathetic to that, and can I just say I'm deeply sorry that her cancer's spread that far. And when you say there for the grace of God, yeah, we're all going to go there, and we're all preparing to die in one sense, of course. The trouble is, I don't think this is I've been arguing this about philosophy for the last few decades, but it hasn't got very far because we have different philosophical backgrounds. I'm a Christian. I think we don't have the right over our own lives. But I think more, it's really about economics and justice. The problem is it's absolutely fine for Esther Rantzen and for Diana Rigg and other wealthy, independent people to make these moral decisions for themselves. The difficulty is when we legislate it for the whole of society, because at that point, the poor then find themselves a burden on the state with too few resources, and the pressure to accept the early termination of their life will grow too great. It's the slippery slope argument, and I'm particularly when it comes to economics, that it almost always happens.
But if they were to write into the legislation that it could only apply once someone has been given a terminal illness, that their life has got no more than 6 months, doesn't that change things, particularly if then 2 doctors certified that the patient was of sound mind mentally?
Well, yes, of course, that's a good argument. But the trouble is that's not how things work in our culture. I mean, if you look, for example, at the abortion debate, where there were supposed to be very powerful safeguards written in, they've simply been eroded over time under pressure. And I've no doubt at all that any safeguards we wrote in for euthanasia, once we started the process, would also be eroded. And it simply means that as people get old, even if the state does nothing, they'll look at themselves and think, I'm taking away resources from my children and grandchildren, I better pop off, or the pressure, I think, will become enormous. And I think this is one of those things, as a matter of social policy, where issues of economics and social justice and our psychology all mean that it's too fragile to legislate in that kind of way. We're better off making sure that our doctors have a statutory right to save us rather than kill us.
The legislation need to modernise. I mean, Dame Esther Rantzen, speaking today, has made a point about her family and friends and saying what a difficult position they are in. This doesn't just affect her, but if they were to choose to accompany her to Dignitas, they could face prosecution. I mean, you could face up to 14 years in jail for accompanying someone. And you wouldn't want, if a loved one did choose to go to Dignitas, you wouldn't want to feel as though you would come back and face criminal prosecution, would you? That doesn't seem fair.
No, I agree with...
Have we lost him?
Yeah,
We've lost him.
We've lost Dr Gavin Ashenden, but thank you very much. He's the Associate Editor of the Catholic Herald.
We've got in the studio, as it happens, Arlene Foster, former leader of the DUP of this parish, and Colville Ranger, member of the House of Lords, both members of the House of Lords. Arlene Foster, I wanted to talk to you first about, if you don't mind, what Dame Esther Rantzen has said. I suspect you're closer to Dr Ashenden.
I am, and I think Gavin has articulated it very well. And people talk about safeguards in the legislation. There is no watertight safeguard in relation to assisted dying, and I think it would be a very slippery slope. And actually, I attended a meeting in the House of Lords recently where we were learning about the experiences in Canada and other jurisdictions where they do actually have assisted dying legislation. And it really was quite scary, Andrew, because we were hearing from people who, as Gavin said, were in a social situation. They felt they were a burden on their family. They felt that this was what they should really do. And the doctors were encouraging them to go down this line. I mean, I was really shocked about that, because obviously we look at doctors as people who want to sustain life. And it's very interesting that when you look at the palliative care professionals in the United Kingdom, 83% of them say that they would have nothing to do with assisted dying legislation because they want to help people to die well. They do not want to be involved in ending people's lives.
I'm glad you mentioned Canada because am I right about this, Arlene? In Canada, even if you've got prolonged, pronounced mental illness, you can opt for a form of assisted dying.
Yeah, and this is very, very worrying.
Really
because,
scary.
I mean, I heard you speaking to Gavin there, asking him about, if you're of sound mind and you make this decision. And look, who could not be moved by what Dame Esther has said? I mean, this is a lady who has lung cancer and who is clearly in the latter stages of her life. But I mean, in Canada, if you have mental health problems, that's no bar. That's no bar.
That is
and that's
really worrying.
really scary.
Yeah.
And I think we really need to take a step back from this. I understand people going through really difficult diseases and illnesses, and they look at this and they say, would it not be better if I ended my life? But we need to have a really full conversation about this.
Lord Cover, Ranger, what do you think? Do you think there should be a free vote on this?
I think there should be a free vote, but I agree with what Arlene's saying as well, because also, as we look at society now, and we all are living longer, we're living with conditions for longer, there could be that increased pressure to say, well, is it worth it? And you could find society changing its mind and how we treat very older people, especially when they have these illnesses. And the other side of it is that we won't be looking at these illnesses in terms of having better standard of care when we have them, if there's this option out. Now, I'm saying that's an extreme way to go down, but when you start opening this door, it can lead to those unintended consequences, much like what we're sort of seeing in Canada. So the stress testing of these kinds of things, we should really take note of what's happened in other countries and probably be warned. But I do believe it should be a free vote. I think it shouldn't be something that is dictated.
Oh, no, I think it should be a free vote. Absolutely, it should be a free vote. But I think I can understand why people would see it as an attractive option and say, oh, we should, as a modern country, allow people to take their own lives if they're coming near the end of a terrible illness. But there's so many consequences to this, and vulnerable people should be something that we really think about. Older people, I mean, already, Andrew, as you know, when older people go into hospitals, you're concerned that they are getting the care that they desire, because I've heard doctors say, oh, they've had a good life.
Yeah. The old good innings.
You've had a good innings, as if that's the end.
But I think the thing that really concerns me is if we start aligning it with the cost as well.
Yeah.
Because that's where it starts to become a really serious conversation. As soon as people start equating length of life with cost of care, and then there's another option, I think that's a very worrying situation.
But for someone like Dame Esther Ranson and those who are living with terminal illnesses, I mean, they would say they have a right to choose when they want to die. They want to die with dignity. Those few weeks and months at the end of their life can be incredibly painful, not just on themselves, but also emotionally on their family. You would think, perhaps under very strict circumstances, that someone does have the right to choose.
I think you're right. I think not one of us will not have probably been through these circumstances with loved one, family and friends, etc. And it's a hard part of life, seeing that happen and going through it. But I think we have to also bear in mind the consequences. So, again, the open debate, the understanding of what will be the legal consequences, what are the pressures that, how can you stress test this? And then we have that open conversation, as Arlene's saying. I think society will step back and take a look at this again, because we are getting a more ageing population. Yeah. But I think there is some value in that ageing population. I think there's a purpose. And I don't think this, for me personally, is not the way I would.
The Lords will be... Molly Meacher led the campaign in the Lords a couple of years ago, and her bill was defeated, of course. Do you think... What's your sense in Parliament, Arlene? Do you sense the mood has swung towards assisted dying now? I think it's certainly changing.
I think it probably is changing, especially with high-profile people like Dame Esther raising the issues. Prue Leith, of course, famously, because she witnessed her brother dying in quite a painful way. She has been wanting to have those conversations as well. Her son, of course, takes a different view. He takes a view of the right to life. Danny Kruger. So I think it will come back, and I think probably the Lords is the place where it will come back to first, and we will have that discussion. I remember sitting in this studio when the last debate came along in the House of Lords. It was on a Friday, and it went the whole day. There were so many people who wanted to speak in it. I think it went on until late in the evening. I think people are concerned about it, but publicly, I think there needs to be more of an awareness as well, because when you ask the public, what do you understand by assisted dying, there's a whole... It's not really understood what is meant by that. So we do need to have the conversation, but I'm afraid I would be on the side of putting more funding into palliative care to allowing people to die well. And I think that's what we should be concentrating on.
But it's certainly very complex, isn't it? You will have an opinion at home, gbviews@gbnews.com. Look, whilst we've got you both, wanted to ask you about MP's record pay rise hike. £6,000 pay hike next year, up to £92,731. Very nice indeed, Lord Ranger.
I believe this has something to do with inflation. I think
inflation's currently below 5%.
It is.
This sits at 7.1%.
Look, at this point, I think parliamentarians have to think carefully about the pay rise that there is there. It's not a good look.
No.
You know, we've got public services looking at the rises that we can apply there. Obviously, we know about the strikes, we know about the challenges. I'm not one for saying that MPs aren't paid the right amount. I think there is something to be said about where is an MP salary benchmarked? Where is it benchmarked against senior civil servants? Where is it benchmarked against GPs? It's not in that bracket. So there is an issue about where MP salaries sit at the moment. But obviously, applying these increases at this point in time is a difference.
And Arlene, nurses and a lot of NHS frontline workers got 5% when inflation was already... was much higher. It was in double figures. This doesn't... Is it... I mean, is Colville right? It doesn't look good.
No, it certainly doesn't look good, but we have to remember that this isn't set by parliamentarians.
No, I get
this is
that.
set by independent payment. I think it's the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority that sets this. And they took it in October, and they, in October, apparently, if you looked at it, the public sector pay was 7% higher in October this year than it was last year, and that's why they've come up with this figure. And this has been the case since 2010, since the expenses scandal, which you'll of course remember. MPs said, right, we're not going to set our pay anymore, we're going to send it over to the independent body. And when the independent body comes back and says, here's what it is, there's always
an outcry.
Oh, we can't set. And you know, I do believe if you want to get the right people into Parliament, if you want to get the right people in to be our members of Parliament, then we have to pay them. And that's the reality.
But they do have the right to suggest a lower pay rise.
They do.
Do you think that should happen?
And you know what? They probably will, because they'll be under incredible pressure not to
Especially
take
by the time
7.1%.
April rolls around.
And you can just hear Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak are both going to say they're not taking the pay rise. Well,
it's the same every time.
Yeah, every time the leaders don't take it.
Yeah.
We have to ask you. You're not accepting the bribe, then, £2.5 billion in Northern Ireland.
Personally, me.
to bring back the devolved power sharing.
Look, I mean, I think we discussed this last week.
Yes, we did.
There is a lot of talking still to be done, as I understand it, in terms of the financial package to get Northern Ireland back on a financial sustainability footing, but also the issue of the Windsor framework and whether that's going to be settled. Is the government going to bring forward legislation to secure Northern Ireland's place within the UK? All of that will have to be sorted out. And I'm not a betting woman, but if you'd asked me last week, I would have said, no, it's not going to happen before Christmas.
Does that mean you don't get? Does that mean the £2.5 billion inducements are withdrawn?
No, it'll not be withdrawn. Although Chris Heaton-Harris is making a statement today, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, so it'll be interesting to see what he has to say. Look, the pressure was all on to get it done by Christmas. It'll probably happen in the new year.
OK.
Lord Ranger, we don't have long, but I did want to ask you about Baroness Mone. Do you think she should be removed now from the House of Lords?
I personally do. Look, I'm a new peer. I've just entered the House of Lords. It's a great privilege, it's a great honour. I have a lot of people asking me about it because and I'm still learning about what it's... And then we have this situation which affects the reputation of the institution, and me personally, I feel, affects my reputation because I'm associated with this. So when this is the situation, I think she should be removed and be taken away from it, deal with the issue outside the House of Lords, removed from the House of Lords, and then when there's some kind of resolution, we can see when the smoke clears. But right now, I find it a very difficult situation. It's almost a great unsaid yesterday. I was saying to other people, what's going on? And we all feel shocked because when you enter the House of Lords, you do feel the responsibility, you do feel the accountability and the pride of the institution you're representing, the country we're representing. So I think we have to behave in a certain way.
And just very briefly, what do you think, Arlene? She didn't declare even in the Household's Register of Interest her financial interest here, and she knew she had to.
Well, I have to say, watching her on Sunday, I was wondering who her PR expert was, because they should be sacked.
Never hired them.
Expert was not the word I would have.
But, you know, I mean, the woman obviously should have declared what was going on. She now comes out and says that she's been made a scapegoat. Sorry, what?
So out the door?
Yeah, I think, well, she should do it herself, of course.
Yeah, resign.
Yeah.
She should resign herself.
All right, Arlene Foster and Lord Ranger, very good to see you this morning. Thank you very much indeed. Stay with us. We're going to be talking about dentistry. 4 out of 5 dentists in England not taking on new NHS patients. Apparently, universal dental care has likely gone for good. This is Britain's Newsroom.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good morning. Alex Bergill here with your latest GB News weather forecast. Whilst in the north there will be some wintry showers today, in the south many of us have woken up to a wet start. Some persistent rain here could cause some problems on the roads this morning, but it is all gradually going to clear away towards the southeast as we go through the afternoon. Something drier and brighter following, particularly across central and later southern parts, whilst there will be plenty of showers, particularly across parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland and then later into northern England and Wales. Some sleet, some snow, perhaps even some hail mixed in with these. A chilly feel to things after a mild start for many, turning chillier through the day, especially in the brisk winds. Overnight then, further showers likely, particularly across northwest and parts of the UK, drier towards the southeast, and there will be some clear skies here with some chilly air around. I am expecting a touch of frost in some places as we wake up on Wednesday morning, but those brisk winds stopping the frost from being particularly widespread. As we go through Wednesday itself, then some bright skies to start across the far east and in the southeast, but then increasing amounts of cloud as we go through the morning and into the afternoon. Some rain likely, particularly across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. Could be a little bit heavy at times and quite persistent here. Further south and east, a drier picture, but pretty cloudy with a few spots of rain possible, and temperatures just about scraping into double figures. Increasing winds later Wednesday, strengthening for Thursday with the risk of gusts of 60 to 80 miles an hour.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 10 a.m. on Tuesday, the 19th of December. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and me, Ellie Costello.
Politicians' pay rise. Guess what? They're going to get a bigger pay hike than nurses and ambulance workers. The extra £6,000 would take their salary to £92,000.
Dame Esther Ranson has revealed she has joined assisted dying clinic Dignitas in Switzerland and will consider going there to end her life as she battles with stage 4 lung cancer.
Should the miners' striker get a pardon? An SNP has launched a legal bid to pardon miners convicted of offences during the strikes in the 1980s. Our political correspondent, Catherine Forster, has the latest.
Yes, it's already happened in Scotland, where last year the law was changed to pardon convicted miners there. Now an SNP MP wants that change to come to England and Wales as well. I'll bring you more shortly.
Schools trans guidance. The long-awaited guidelines have been in the works since 2018 and say there will be no sanctions for teachers if a pupil's preferred pronouns are not used.
And in Iceland, a volcano has erupted. It's erupted in the southwest of the country after weeks of intense earthquake activity. About 4,000 people have been evacuated.
Well, we want all of your views today on any of the stories that we're talking about, but especially assisted dying. Do you think there should be a free vote in Parliament? Do let us know.
She's a national treasure, isn't she, Esther
Dame
Ranson?
Esther Ranson.
I think she is, and she's campaigned, all her journalistic life has been campaigning, and in the last 20 years she's been campaigning for older people's rights with Silver Line, that line she set up. So I think she's going to be a very potent voice in this debate.
Yeah, let us know what you think about that. gbviews@gbnews.com. But first, let's get your news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Ellie, thank you very much and good morning. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. Guidance for schools on how to manage children who may wish to change their gender will be published today. It's understood the guidelines, which are not legally enforceable, will require schools to inform parents if their children say they'd like to change genders. There'll be no obligation to allow students to socially transition or to provide gender-neutral facilities. Teachers will also be given the choice to opt out of using a student's chosen pronoun if they have a reasonable objection. The Stonewall charity says the guidance has not properly considered the needs of trans and gender-diverse youth. Britain will join an international coalition to protect ships as they sail through the Red Sea after a recent series of attacks. Houthi militants in Yemen have been stepping up assaults on vessels as they pass through one of the world's most important shipping routes. The group is backed by Iran and allied with the Hamas terror group. It's prompted BP to pause all its tankers in the area. The Royal Navy's HMS Diamond shot down a suspected attack drone at the weekend. It's understood the destroyer will be part of the new patrols. Council planning departments are expected to be put on notice today as the Housing Secretary cracks down on those accused of dragging their feet on new applications. Michael Gove will call out local authorities with a history of poor performance on building new homes. It's understood that some councils will be given 3 months to improve or risk having their powers stripped and developments forced upon them. Labour described Mr Gove's plans as truly through the looking glass, but Housing Minister Lee Rowley says houses are being built.
We go back to the early 2010s, it was about 100 to 150,000 a year. We're now into the 240,000 a year. The most amount of house building in the past 30 years has been in recent years. We've got more to do, there's no doubt about that, but we're going to hit the 1 million houses this Parliament, and we are increasing building even during times of economic challenge. And there's going to be challenge in the coming months, but the progress is still being made.
The old model accessing dental care in England is gone for good. That's the warning from a leading think tank. Most dentists are no longer taking on new NHS patients, with warnings the service is in decay and at its worst point in 75 years. According to the Nuffield Trust, spending on dental services has dropped by more than £500 million since 2015. It says a universal service is no longer offered by the NHS and recommends the government take some difficult decisions to ensure those most in need continue to receive basic care. Dame Esther Rantzen says she'll consider using assisted dying as she battles lung cancer. The broadcaster, known for starting the Childline charity, revealed in May that her cancer had progressed to stage 4. Speaking to the BBC, she revealed she's joined the Swiss organisation Dignitas, which provides doctor-supervised assisted dying. She's calling for a free vote in Parliament, saying it's important that the law catches up with what the country wants. Mining workers who went on strike in the 1980s could have their convictions overturned as part of a bill to be presented in Parliament today. Thousands of miners were arrested in 1984 and 1985 after they walked out in a dispute with Margaret Thatcher's government. Scotland has already pardoned all those who took part in the strike. Owen Thompson, who's an MP for the SNP, wants the law changed in England and Wales as well. Human rights lawyer David Haig told GB News the bill doesn't go far enough.
It's all very well pardoning people when there's been injustices, but the legislation in Scotland wasn't extended to cover compensation for the people that have been pardoned. Because, of course, if a country is saying, sorry, we did you wrong, there should be some recompense for that. So that's the first thing in terms of what does it mean. If it passes here, it means that the people's convictions, which were things like public order, I mean, again, I was too young to remember the strikes as well, but it will mean things like convictions for public order offences at those times will be quashed, but it won't extend to compensation or other remedies.
A large volcano is erupting in Iceland, spewing lava and ash into the sky. The spectacle started north of Grindavik just after 10 o'clock last night. Thousands of people were evacuated from the area last month due to concerns over intense seismic activity. These pictures are coming to us live. Those watching us on television will be able to see lava continuing to bubble out of that 2.5-mile-long crack in the earth. Iceland's government says it doesn't pose a threat to life, but curious sightseers are warned to keep away. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying Play GB News. Now back to Andrew and Ellie.
Thanks so much, Tatiana. So many of you getting in touch this morning. Thank you so much for your company. Lots of you getting in touch on Dame Esther Rantzen. Very sad news, stage 4 lung cancer. And she's now saying she signed up for Dignitas Clinic in Switzerland and she would be looking to take her own life if there's no improvement on her condition.
Ronnie says euthanasia should be an option for people. If an animal is suffering, we put it down humanely. Why shouldn't people be treated in the same way?
And, of course, the argument to that would be that people, human beings, have more sanctity of life than an animal would. But yes, a very good point made by Ronnie. Rob says, the right to die. Well, I lost my wife of 53 years in April this year. Very sorry to hear that, Rob. Said she had pneumonia. Thankfully, no pain, but at the end, she was drowning in her lung fluid. It was very frightening. In the last week of her life, she asked the nurse if she could have a tablet to take at night so that she would not wake up. She wanted to pass away in her sleep. Obviously, I wanted every second possible with the love of my life, but but I would have been very happy for her to have taken that tablet and to have that right in the last few days of her life to stop the suffering. Yes, Rob says there should be a free vote in Parliament. Very powerful.
Yeah, and Lee says right to die should be an option. In the last week or so, my granddad had care, struggling with pain from bone cancer, incontinent for months, broke his leg while being treated in hospital. He was in agony. Very sad.
Yeah, very, very difficult. And it is when you get into that question of dignity, isn't it? Especially in the last few weeks. Perhaps people should have a right to die. Let us know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.com.
Now, politicians are going to receive a £6,000 pay hike next year. That's right, you did hear it. Just over 7%, taking the salaries to £92,700.
Yes, this comes after a series of public sector wage hikes, which will see MPs getting a bigger pay rise than nurses and ambulance workers.
Well, in the studio with us is the Tory MP for Shipley, Philip Davis, well known to our viewers. Philip, morning, how are you? Are you rubbing your hands with glee at this pay rise?
I'm rubbing my hands at the punishment beating I'm just about to get.
You are going to get a punishment beating. Look, I know this is recommended by a separate body. You're not setting your own pay, but it doesn't look good, does it?
Well, no, it never looks good. I mean, when I got elected to Parliament, we used to vote each year on our own pay. And none of us found it a particularly edifying process, to be perfectly honest. And so, after the expenses scandal, everyone said this is outrageous. It should be set by an independent body. So, lo and behold, we said, right, OK, brilliant. We don't actually want to get involved in this either, to be perfectly honest. So here's an independent body to decide it. And now they make a recommendation. Now everyone's saying, well, actually, MP should make this decision now and overrule the independent body. I mean, we can't win, can we, whatever we do? The IPSA, who set the pay, have a formula, which is that it's the average of public sector workers' pay rises each year, which, I mean, you know, I don't know. How do you think it should be calculated? I mean, I don't know. However it's calculated, we're going to get a beating about it, aren't we?
And you know what's happened? Rishi Sunak's going to say, I'm not taking the pay rise. Keir Starmer, who's on £150,000, £160,000, says he won't take the pay rise. And then you backbenchers are made to look like you're greedy, grasping what's-its.
Well, look, I don't think being an MP is a particularly popular profession. So if we're not getting a punishment beating for that, well, we're getting it for something else, to be perfectly honest. My view is, and it's always been my view ever since I got into Parliament, is it should be set independently. Yeah. And it's set independently. It should have nothing to do with us. It does have nothing to do with us. And if people don't think what's being proposed is right, they should make their views to IPSA. They're the ones who make the decision. Don't take it out on us.
So you're going to take the full right, are you?
Well, of course, I'll be paid whatever. If they cut my pay, I'll be paid whatever I'm paid. In fact, to be perfectly honest, there is no mechanism for not accepting it. To be perfectly honest, you will be paid it.
Yeah.
You can't say to them.
You could give the money to charity.
You could do that, but there's no mechanism for not accepting it.
No.
But IPSA does have the right, doesn't it, to suggest a lower pay rise, and there is going to be pressure on them to do that, isn't there? Especially by April, when we're seeing inflation come down already. I mean, already inflation at 4.6%. This pay rise is at 7.1. It's not a great look, is it?
It's their decision. They can make the decision.
But do you think it should come down by April?
Well, the moment you start getting into this, you start getting into MPs deciding on the pay rise or whatever. I don't think it should have anything to do with me, the decision. The decision is IPSA's. I'm perfectly happy for it to be IPSA's. I'm perfectly content with whatever they decide. I will not be belly aching if they say it should be 2%, 3%, 4%. I will not be I've never belly ached about what the decision is, and I will accept it, whatever it is. What I will say is, I think there is a bit of a myth, and I've never accepted the argument that if you pay MPs more, you will get better MPs.
That's interesting.
I don't accept that.
As Arlene Foster was saying, if you want decent MPs, you've got to pay them.
I don't accept that argument. I think, you know, many of us would have been better off staying in our jobs in the private sector when we went into Parliament. We didn't come in for the pay.
No.
And I don't think you want people coming in for the pay, to be perfectly honest. I think you want people coming in because they want to, because it's public service and they want to do the right thing. And I think the things that deter people from becoming members of Parliament is not the pay. I think it's the abuse you get on social media and all the scrutiny and all that. That's the bit that
You're separated from your family.
Exactly. So I'm not one of those MPs who thinks that if you increase the pay, you'll get better MPs on the back of it.
Do you think £92,000 a year is fair for the work that you do?
It's not for me to decide.
But you talk there about scrutiny and about, you know, the abuse on social media. £92,000, is that?
It's 93, actually.
Well, 93 if you're rounding it up. Is it fair?
It's for other people. It's for IPSA to determine what's right and what's wrong and what's fair. I do not want to get involved in that. All I'm saying is it will not make any difference to me as to whether I was an MP, whether I was given a pay rise or not. I'm not in it for the pay. and I don't think most MPs are in it for the pay, to be perfectly frank. I know we get a bad press,
I think that's right.
But I genuinely don't
I think I often say, don't slag off MPs like that, because there are one or two bad apples, but most of them work very hard, and I wouldn't want to do the job. And I really wouldn't want to do your job, Philip, because I think it's not glamorous. It's a lot of grief, and social media's changed everything. Talking of people who might be seen to be in it for the money, Baroness Mone.
Yes.
I can't recall a more misguided political interview of recent years. It was every moment she opened her mouth, thought, what are you doing, woman? She wasn't digging a hole. She was doing it with a JCB.
Made Prince Andrew's decision look,
Yes.
look positively like a good idea.
Unbelievable.
No, I mean, it was extraordinary. And, look, I mean, the question you've got to ask yourself is, why did she take leave of absence from the House of Lords? You know, if she's done nothing
Well, she
wrong,
says she's done it to clear her name.
Well, you know.
She didn't declare the money she was getting from that company in the Register of Interest. That's the first thing. They lied, she's admitted, to the press, but that's not a crime, apparently. It's not a crime. But if you lie to the press, I'm not building up what we do, Philip, but you are lying to the public, because that's how a lot of the public get their information, through programmes like this, my newspaper. So she was lying to everybody. She was lying to taxpayers.
No, I mean, it's indefensible as far as I'm concerned. Completely indefensible. I have no idea why she did the interview, but I don't think we'll see her in the House of Lords again.
Do you think she should be removed?
There's no procedure, is there? I was checking. It last happened in 1918, Philip.
Yeah, I'm not aware of what the procedure is. I'm not a member, so I don't know. But I don't think we'll ever see her in the House of Lords again. I think we can safely say that.
But people would... That's fine. She won't go because she'll stay away because nobody wants her there. But shouldn't there be a mechanism? Because the last time peers were kicked out was they were seen as traitors. They were Irish peers back in 1918, too close to the Kaiser Bill in Germany, so they were kicked out. Not since 1918 has a peer been kicked out. There must have been peers who've done really bad things who should have been kicked out. You can be suspended, of course, but shouldn't there be a mechanism?
Clearly, I mean,
because you lot get kicked out.
Yes, exactly.
In the Commons.
But I think there should be a mechanism for removal. I genuinely don't know what the process is, because I'm not a member of it, and I'm highly unlikely to be a member of it.
I think that's probably a fair comment.
But there clearly should be a mechanism for removing people who have behaved badly.
Yeah, OK. Philip, whilst we've got you, wanted to ask you about Dame Esther Rantzen. Very sad news. She's got stage 4 lung cancer. She has signed up for Dignitas Clinic in Switzerland. She is now calling for MPs to be given a free vote on changing the rules around assisted dying. Do you think that there should be a free vote?
Well, we had a free vote. I'm trying to think how many years ago it was.
2015?
It was about 2015. Yeah, we did have a free vote, and MPs voted overwhelmingly to retain the status quo, as did I might add. Look, Esther Rantzen, remarkable woman, absolutely remarkable. I've got nothing but praise for her. And I've got massive amounts of sympathy for people who find themselves in a situation where they want to end their own life. And in principle, how can you argue with them? It's their decision, it's their life. Why should they not be able to? I think the problem with changing the law is the unintended consequences of it, and whether or not you create new unfairnesses in the system. So there are some people who, yes, of course, they want to end their own life, and you might say, well, why shouldn't they? But, of course, there are some people who don't really want to end their own life. Yeah. And they'd be forced into making a decision. Once you're allowed to make a decision, you're in effect forced into making a decision, whether it's yes or no. And there'd be lots of people who might think, well, actually, I'll say yes because I don't want to be a burden on my family. Even though they're not a burden on their family, they might feel they're a burden on their family. And I think the problem with it is you may end up people choosing that course of action who don't really want to, but feel that they're a burden on their family. And so my fear is if you change the law, yes, of course, you deal with the terrible situation like Esther Rantzen's in, and everyone has sympathy for that. My fear is you would create new injustices where people are making that decision when really deep down they don't really want to make that decision.
We spoke to Gavin Essendon, who's a former chaplain to the Queen. He's on the board of the Catholic Herald, and he said it's sympathetic as he is to Esther Rantzen. She's a woman of money, so she can afford to go to Dignitas. She can... but he said, what about far poorer families where there will be pressure on just the people you're talking about? And that's why he thought the law shouldn't be changed.
Yeah, look, there's no painless panacea here of an outcome. You know, if you look at one case in isolation or one set of circumstances in isolation, then of course people would say we must change the law. But when you vote to change the law in Parliament, you've got to be mindful of what the unintended consequences of that are. And I'm not convinced that it wouldn't create new injustices and new unfairnesses that then people would say, well, hold on, we never really expected this or wanted this. And I'm not persuaded of the case for changing the law.
What about even just changing the legislation so that family and friends cannot be prosecuted if they were to accompany someone to Dignitas? Because that's what Dame Esther Ranson is talking about, not just herself, but she's saying her family and friends are in a difficult position now where they face up to 14 years in prison if they accompany her there.
Yeah, well, you see, the thing is, if you remove all of the penalties from... Then
for others, not for...
No, but you're still, in effect, by definition, you're helping to legalise that process. I think these are very difficult decisions. I don't think any MP finds them very easy. Nobody's sort of gung-ho about the decision. It's a balance between how do we protect people at the same time as giving people the freedom to make their own decisions. And there is a conflict there between protecting vulnerable people and also giving people freedom of choice. I'm just not persuaded. I think you've got to change the law, you've got to be persuaded of the change. I'm not necessarily yet persuaded of the change, but they're very difficult decisions.
We're going to finally get, after 5 years, the guidance for schools on trans. It's just guidance, Philip. So even though teachers can no longer be held accountable if they don't accept a child's pronoun, but if and there should be a presumption that you shouldn't have gender-neutral schools. But if a school wants to do that, they can. So should the government not have taken a really firm line here and legislated and said, we are taking a stand here, we're going to row back against this wokery?
I think, look, Kemi Badenoch, I think, has done a great job on this, and she's taken it as far as she can without legislation, and I think it protects a lot of teachers. You know, and I think it's great. There's people who transition or whatever, they won't be able to play. If you're a boy, you won't be able to play girls' football and anything like this. They've done a lot here. The question is, if you change the law, you need primary legislation to change the law. Hugely time-consuming. It takes about a year to get these things through Parliament. And who knows what amendments may be put down. The government sort of loses control of the agenda once you start down the primary legislation route. So it doesn't come without risks, that. So I think people who are criticising the government for that need to be mindful that actually things could have been amended and made things worse. I think the government have gone as far as they can without changing the law. I'm sure that if they could have gone further without changing the law, they would have done. They've gone as far as they can without changing the law, and I think I'm really happy with what they've done.
And very, very briefly, this SNP moved to give all miners who committed offences during the miners' strike a pardon, which includes 15 committed of arson, 3 of murder, 429 assault occasioning bodily harm. The list goes on. Riot 137. 5,600 cases, and a blanket pardon for all of them, apparently.
No, this is not going to happen. This is a 10-minute rule bill. It will go to the bottom of the pile for private members' bills. It will never see the light of day. If it ever does, I will do everything I can to block it. I was brought up in a mining place in Doncaster during the miners' strike. The behaviour of many of those striking miners, the intimidation, the violence, it was absolutely revolting, to be perfectly honest, and there is absolutely no way on God's earth I'm going to allow this bill to get anywhere near being legislation.
I thought you might say that. Thank you very much.
Philip Davis,
Tory MP.
Thank you very much. And we'll be talking about this, very shortly. Heroes, not criminals. That's what some would describe those being pardoned or potentially pardoned for criminality during the miners' strike. We're going to be talking about that next. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Britain's Newsroom. We're going to start in Iceland, where a volcano has erupted after weeks of intense earthquake activity there. Those watching on television now will be able to see lava continuing to bubble out of that 2.5-mile long crack in the earth. Just incredible pictures coming out of Iceland this morning.
The Icelandic government says it doesn't pose a threat to life, but they have evacuated 4,000 people from a nearby small town. Sightseers are being warned to keep away, but we're also being told it's not going to have the impact, thank the Lord, that the 2010 earthquake had in Iceland, which, if you recall, caused a huge cloud of dust, which caused the biggest disruption to flights in Europe since the Second World War.
Well, the eruption started at about 10:30 last night, and eyewitnesses said the sky lit up in red from the eruption and smoke could be seen billowing into the air. So that local town has been evacuated, around 4,000 people, and so far no threat to life. So that is a relief, with echoes of 2010.
And we'll keep you posted. Now, an SNP, we were just talking to Philip Davies about this, an SNP MP has launched a legal bid to pardon miners convicted of offences during the miners' strikes in the 1980s.
Yes, Owen Thompson will present a bill to the UK Parliament calling for a law change to overturn the convictions of hundreds of miners during the violent industrial dispute.
Catherine Forster, our Westminster correspondent, is in Westminster. Catherine, now, this has already happened in Scotland, where there is, of course, an SNP administration. He's trying now to get this done in England and Wales.
Yes, exactly. The law was changed in Holyrood, north of the border, last year, where now miners who ended up with convictions during the miners' strikes of 1984 and 85 were pardoned. No compensation was given, but those convictions were wiped off the record. Now, Owen Thompson, SNP MP, wants that extended to England and Wales, and he's trying to do that with this 10-minute rule motion, which is basically a mechanism it's a backbench bill. He gets 10 minutes this afternoon to put his case to why this should happen. Somebody else can then speak for 10 minutes as to why it shouldn't. If it gets nodded through to the next stage, that goes through. I have to say, though, that I think beyond that, I'd be very, very surprised if this goes any further. First of all, it's highly, highly controversial, as you've alluded to. Some of these miners committed very small crimes, breaches of the peace, etc. They would say they were fighting for their livelihoods, they were fighting for their survival, so to speak. But also many of them rather more serious, and some people will worry that it sort of puts all the miners into the good camp and the government and the police into the bad camp, and that's rather an oversimplification. And also, I suspect that the government in Westminster probably won't take very kindly to an SNP MP coming and saying, we've done this in Scotland and we think you should be doing this in England and Wales. The scars, of course, from the miners' strike still run incredibly deep in parts of the country, particularly in Yorkshire, in Nottinghamshire, in Derbyshire. Is it a good idea to drag all this up when ultimately there'll be no compensation tied to it? So it may get through this stage, but I'd be amazed if it gets an awful lot further.
And Catherine, as you say, it's very recent history that we're talking about here, isn't it, with the miners' strikes? I don't know if you just caught us talking to Philip Davies, the Tory MP, but from his answer on this, he said it's going to face fierce debate and opposition in the House. I mean, he has personally said he will stop this. He recalls his childhood and growing up during the miners' strikes and talks about the violence and the intimidation that took place at the time, and he says it was just completely awful. I mean, there's such fierce debate and very strong feeling on this still, Catherine.
Yes, there's nothing black and white about this. It's many, many shades of grey, isn't it? I did hear what Philip Davies was saying. Very interesting. Also, Martin Daubney, one of our presenters, of course, was talking a little bit earlier, saying that his father had been a miner during the strike and he'd made the decision to cross the picket line. He wanted to carry on working. He needed the money, and he felt very worried about basically this sort of miners good, everybody else bad rhetoric, and thinks that it's all this will do potentially is unearth and sort of rejuvenate all these very old wounds and conflicts. But clearly the SNP MP feels that a terrible injustice has been committed and that feels that there is a moral case for these miners having their convictions wiped. But I doubt that he will have the support of the majority of MPs in Westminster.
All right, that's Catherine Forster, our Westminster correspondent. Thanks, Catherine. I think it's completely outrageous.
Yeah, well, you will certainly have an opinion on that at home. Do let us know what you think. Should the miners be pardoned? GB Views at GBNews.
Over 5,000 criminal offences. They include assault, arson,
murder,
actual bodily harm, riot, murder. Come on. Come on. What are they thinking of?
You will certainly have a view, so do get in touch with that. Still to come, decimated dentistry. 4 out of 5 dentists in England are not taking on new NHS patients, with warnings that universal dental care has likely gone for good. That and much more after your Warning News with Tatiana Sanchez.
Went ages.
Good morning, this is the latest from the GB Newsroom. As we've been hearing, a large volcano is erupting in Iceland, spewing lava and ash into the sky. The spectacle started north of Grindavik just after 10 o'clock last night. The nearby international airport is still open, but there are delays to both arrivals and departures as ash clouds the sky. These are pictures coming to us live. For those watching us on television, they'll be able to see lava continuing to bubble out of that 2.5-mile-long crack in the earth. Iceland's government says it doesn't pose a threat to life, but curious sightseers are warned to keep away. In the last few moments, the government has published new guidance for schools on how to manage children who may wish to change their gender. Schools are advised to inform parents if their children say they'd like to change their gender identity. There's no obligation to allow students to socially transition or to provide gender-neutral facilities. Teachers are also given the choice to opt out of using a student's chosen pronoun if they have a reasonable objection. The Stonewall charity says the guidance doesn't consider the needs of trans and gender-diverse youth. Britain's joining an international coalition to protect ships as they sail through the Red Sea after a recent series of attacks. Houthi militants in Yemen are stepping up assaults on vessels as they pass through one of the world's most important shipping routes. They're backed by Iran and allied with Hamas terror group. It's prompted BP to pause all its tankers in the area. The Royal Navy's HMS Diamond shot down a suspected attack drone at the weekend. It's understood the destroyer will be part of the new patrols. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2695 and 1.1606 euros. The price of gold, £1,596 and 35 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100 at 7,624 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thanks very much, Tatiana. Now, Sir Keir Starmer is gunning for Michael Gove, saying the Levelling Up Minister has serious questions to answer about his dealing with Baroness Mone over that huge PPE contract that she helped to set up.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels
We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
(10:38), you're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Ellie Costello.
And we're very pleased to be joined by two political commentators this morning, Tonya Buxton and GB News' own Nigel Nelson. Very good morning to you. Very good to see you.
Are you both well?
Both well?
Tonya, I must say, looking very festive.
I've got a sparkly
We love the
Very
sparkles.
festive. Where's
Lovely.
your sparkles?
I'll
Nigel?
get the sparkles next week. Oh, no, we're not on next week.
You're matching us,
Your wits
Nigel.
will have to sparkle. For
Indeed
a
they
change.
will. Indeed
For a
they will.
change, Nigel. You don't make me say. For a change.
Well, thank you very much.
Should we start, Nigel, with you and the pressure that is now upon Michael Gove? He's got serious questions to answer, hasn't he, about his dealings with Baroness Mone?
Yeah, I think that a number of ministers have. I mean, what she's claiming now is that people knew what she was doing when she received that huge contract. She didn't do herself much favours by giving her an interview over the weekend where she admitted to lying about the whole thing. And there are a lot of calls now for her to actually be thrown out of the House of Lords. You couldn't do that until 2015. Even if you went to prison, there was no way of getting rid of a peer. Now, under a new law that came in 2015, what they can do is say, look, if you breach the code of conduct, you can be chucked out. What she didn't do was register any of this. So she now admits she made some money from it, never told anybody. So one way or another, it's not just her lying to the press, she's also not done what she's meant to do in the House of Lords.
And Nigel, when you say lie to the press, we should be quite clear that you lie to the press, you lie to the media, you're lying to the public,
That's
you're lying
right,
to the taxpayer,
yes.
you're lying to everybody, because that's how they get...
Well, it's a lie, full stop,
Yes,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
she says it's not a crime. It is a crime to lie to the public about how taxpayers' money was being lavished on her and her husband.
Whether it's a crime you could prosecute is one thing. I mean, the whole point is that do we want a legislator who doesn't tell the truth, which is what it comes down to.
In fairness to Gove, obviously he'll speak when he speaks, but he would argue, I'm sure, she used the fast track, which was available to members of the House of Lords, to say, oi, what about this idea for PPE? He said, sounds great. And I'm told passed it then on to the civil service.
That's what he's saying,
people.
that's right, yes.
So, and if he did do that, that's fine. But did he at any point after that know that she was involved?
Well, I mean, that's the big question that needs to be answered. I mean, I think that there's the whole fast-track system was quite plainly dodgy.
Yeah.
I mean, what you had was if an MP or a peer or somebody in government knew somebody who might be able to produce material, then they fast-track contracts through without any kind of a competitive tender. So I do appreciate that during COVID, when we were short of PPE, it was really important to get stuff moving quickly. But the question was, were the checks and balances, the basic ones made that should have been? And it sounded like it doesn't.
And it needs to be not just about Mone, it needs to be about the fact that they were spending our hard-earned tax money on buying products that were not fit for purpose. And for me, I'm hoping that that's going to shine a spotlight on that. I personally, from what I've read, I just think that Michael Gove did what you do. You know, he looked at it, it's on his desk, oh, this looks OK, and expected due diligence to be done with this particular thing. And I don't think it was. But the reality is that due diligence was not being done when it came to all of the PPE and whether PPE was useful anyway. So millions and millions and millions were spent. I mean, the fact that she's made 60 million, I personally believe, I understand that she can't be prosecuted and go to jail, but I 100% believe that she should be paying back all of that money. She should not be in the Lords. We don't want people that are, you know, confirmed liars in the Lords. And the other thing is that I think a lot of these companies that made things that were not fit for purpose should be paying back their profits. I'm not saying bankrupt them to the extent where they have to pay back for the staff they paid and what it cost, but they should never make profit from something that doesn't doesn't work.
The Department of Health, we're told, Nigel, is trying to claw back £120 million from Mone's company with her husband. And good luck to them, and let's hope they get it back. But her pitiful attempts to say she didn't benefit because it went to her husband's trust in the Isle of Man, by the way, which we note is a tax haven, obviously, it was pathetic.
Yes,
it is her family. Her husband's put £60 million in the bank at a time of a national crisis, the worst pandemic, blah, blah, and she's saying, I'm a beneficiary, but only if my husband dies. Pathetic.
Yeah, well, of course it is. I mean, it's family money, basically.
You can spend that money any time you like.
Yes, it's family money, and she had that. I mean, that's the whole point, is that she's not told the truth all the way along the line here. I mean, we've got to bear in mind there is a national crime agency investigation going on. To see
what is that into in particular?
Fraud, basically. So that's actually to see if fraud was committed in the process of getting that contract.
Because they weren't truthful or transparent about the quality or her involvement?
I don't know what the details are, but it is a fraud investigation, and obviously, so we have to be a bit careful. We have to see what the NCA actually come up with at the end of that investigation.
Well, Nigel, Tonya, do stay with us. We've got lots to get through with you both, but we do want to talk about Dame Esther Rantzen, because she has joined Dignitas Clinic in Switzerland and said she is considering assisted dying if her lung cancer condition does not improve after treatment.
So I tried to join Dignitas.
Hang on just one second, Tonya. We are speaking now to the Chief Executive of Care Not Killing. Very good to see you this morning, Gordon MacDonald. Thank you very much for joining us. So Esther Rantzen, I mean, to many people, just seen as a national treasure. Just such a sad story, isn't it? Stage 4 lung cancer, and signed up for Dignitas Clinic. What do you make of this story, and do you think there should be a free vote in the House of Parliament over this?
Well, obviously, it's very sad, as all cases are, of people with advanced cancer or any other terminal illness or chronic illness, for that matter. But, we have to take a step back from the emotive personal stories when we're considering whether the law should change. And, the problem is that whenever you change the law in any jurisdiction, you put people who are vulnerable at risk, whether it be people who are disabled or people who are just lonely and elderly. And so we have to find a balance, and Parliament has always sought to do that. Parliament has voted on the matter. They voted on the matter in a free vote just last year in the House of Lords. And of course, in 2015, there was a vote in the House of Commons on a free vote. So there is always a free vote when the matter comes before Parliament. But every time up till now, when Parliament has considered the issue, they've come to the conclusion that it's just not safe to change the law. So although we have a lot of sympathy for people who are in that situation, ultimately, politicians have to consider the public interest, and the public interest has always been deemed to be that we keep the current law, because whilst it is compassionate in the sense of not seeking to prosecute people in an inappropriate way, it is nevertheless acts as a deterrent and protects people.
Yeah, I hear that, but you're also subjecting, Gordon, people like Esther Rantzen potentially to a hideous, terrifying, painful death, devastating for her family and friends, and she will be one of hundreds of thousands of people who are going to be subjected to this.
Well, I think there's no evidence that she's going to have a painful, hideous death.
Well, lots of people do, Gordon. Gordon, lots of people do. Did you read about Diana Rigg? She left messages after her death talking about her awful death from cancer, how she lost control of all her bodily functions, she was humiliated, she was in terrible pain. She wanted the right to choose, the right that you're denying her.
Well, I'm not denying anybody the right to choose. What I'm trying to do is say that there is an alternative way to deal with the issues which these cases raise, and that is by investing properly in palliative care and providing specialist palliative care to all those who need it. At the moment in the UK, a quarter of cancer patients aren't getting all the palliative care that they need. That's shocking, and that's where we should be focusing our attention. How do we actually invest the resources that are really needed in palliative care? Only 30% of specialist palliative care funding comes from the NHS. And, we have an ageing population, and by 2040, we will have a need for 25% more investment in palliative care. So that being the case, we have to say, well, is there an alternative here? Yes, it's an expensive alternative, but it's not that expensive compared to other things that we're spending money on in the NHS.
OK, Gordon MacDonald, Chief Executive of Care Not Killing. Very good to have your thoughts this morning. Thank you very much indeed.
Let's get back to Tonya. Tonya,
I just need to read this.
Oh, sorry.
Andrew. If you do feel you need support and are affected by any of those issues that we've just been talking about, you can call Samaritans. This is their hotline number, 116 123. And Tonya, you were speaking just before that.
Because of there is a history of dementia in my family, I wanted to just register myself for Dignitas, just in case it's something that I decided to do down the line, because I think you have to be completely in your own mind before you can go through with anything like this. It's really difficult to register yourself, yeah. I mean, I've had these conversations with my children, because I think it's having watched various members of my family, and especially those that have friends of mine that have died of painfully of cancer, I do think it is our right. I think it has to be very regulated, because there are some horrible things that could happen. But I do think it really is our right, and I really feel for Esther Ransom.
What I'm told, I mean, the bill that failed in the Lords, Baroness Meach's bill, would have said if you've been told you've got 6 months to live, and then you have 2 doctors to check you that you're sound in mind, then you should be permitted to choose the way to go, and that would be then 2 doctors would be there as well, and they'd apply some form of sedative to ease your passing. That sounds like a sensible way forward.
That sounds reasonable, but there are people that are you know, that things have happened to them that they don't wish to carry on, and they could live for a lot longer than 6 months. I think the point is that if you're able to go to another body, do it. The people that go with you to hold your hand when you make this decision to do should not be prosecuted. That's the key issue for me.
That seems the key point. I mean, if you are, it is your right to decide if you want to die. But when you take a relative with you to go and help you, they face prosecution. Now, the way the system seems to work is that a blind eye is often turned to the fact that somebody has actually helped somebody else. And the only thing about changing the law here, I think Philip Davis made the point earlier, there's an unintended consequence you can get if you don't get the law absolutely right. So what that means is, you know, do we get in a situation where a vulnerable person is basically chivied along to go through with this because people will inherit a lot of money? Now, I know that would be a rare kind of occasion, but you have to actually be aware of that. And so the blind eye bit means that if you're doing it because, you know, out of pure compassion and mercy for the person who wants to die, that's one thing. If you profit out of it, I can understand why the police might want to take a second look.
Yeah, but the idea that Esther Ransom's children may accompany her to Switzerland and then they're interviewed by the police, because often, even though there's no prosecution, they're interviewed by the police.
There's an investigation,
which is really, would be a desperately terrible thing for the children to go through.
But I don't quite see a way around that stage of it. This is what I mean about the blind eye thing, that you might well go through that, but the police would then decide no public interest in any kind of prosecution. Provided the police treat that process really sympathetically, I can understand it. I'm just a bit worried about removing all those checks and balances and what might happen at the end of the day.
It's very complex, isn't it?
Look,
whilst we've got you, wanted to ask, when was the last time you saw the dentist?
So I am very lucky. I've been seeing the same dentist for nearly 30 years.
Don't move, Mouse.
And so
Don't move.
did, but he's kept me on.
Wow.
And because, you know, and so he sees all my children, and I, you know, touch wood that we're so lucky that this is, we became friends with the man, and that's why he keeps us on. But I'm so afraid for all these young families that can't get their kids to see the dentist, because the thing is, especially when kids are young, if you don't get their teeth checked early on, damage can be done. That
we used to go every 6 months, didn't we?
We did, but you know, there was some really terrible dentists back in the 80s, the 70s.
I can still remember the name of mine.
My husband has got, he had like all these little holes drilled into his mouth because dentists used to get money per filling. He didn't need them, and they rotted his teeth actually having these holes done, because the dentist would then charge for every filling. So we've gone from one side to the other now, haven't we? Where people could go and dentists were behaving badly. But everybody, it should be a right to be able to take your children to the dentist or to go to a dentist. There's nothing worse than dental pain. You should be able to go and see somebody.
But this isn't something that's just sprung up, Nigel. This has been going on for ages. I remember when I moved from East London to North London in 2001, 2002, I could not get an NHS dentist.
I mean, I've been in the same boat. That the last NHS dentist I had was about 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And now I pay quite a lot of money.
Yeah, so do I.
You do, yeah.
As a result, I have a really good dentist as a result of that. But that's not the point. The point is that not enough people can go. And the worst thing is people aren't going at all. So I mean, the figures are showing 2 in 5 people haven't been to the dentist for 2 years.
Awful.
A lot of people I know haven't been for nearly 10.
The decay.
Precisely. Or the fact you haven't got the checkup.
And
the checkup just to say, look, this might be a problem.
I think a lot of hospital admissions for children now are linked to their teeth.
Most hospital admissions for kids are now to do with their teeth.
Isn't that
And there's the other
terrible?
point about going for checkups. I mean, they're not just doing a check on your teeth. They're checking there's no cancer there. Everything's looking good. Those checkups are essential, and people won't go if they can't afford to pay the 60, 70 quid it costs to do that check.
71% of dental surgeries in the UK aren't taking on children at the moment. I mean, it's shocking data.
It's really shocking, and they. I mean, I do think it's like I said about the doctors as well. Here, if you go through our dental schools, you have to work in the NHS for a set period of time.
You should have
because
to.
we should have to, exactly. You should have to, because we're sponsoring your education. You should be paying back the public for that, for at least a period of time.
It should be written into their contract.
I agree, absolutely.
Or you repay the money it costs to train. Don't you think, Nigel?
Yes.
It's a simple change to the rules. I don't know why I haven't done it before.
OK, Nigel Nelson, Tonya Buxton, thank you very much indeed.
Now, still to come, MPs are expecting a very hefty pay rise in the new year, bringing their base salary above £92,000. We're going to ask the Conservative MP, Greg Smith, if he thinks this is fair and deserved. It's a bigger pay rise than they gave the nurses. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome to your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. After a rather damp start to the day for many of us, it will turn brighter through the afternoon, but it'll also turn colder and windier with some showers following behind. The rain through this morning has been brought by this weather front that will sink to the southeast through this afternoon and into the evening, and behind it we'll see much colder air being introduced, so it will be a colder night tonight. But for the afternoon, that will allow more sunshine to develop, especially across parts of Wales and the Midlands, as well as northeastern areas of England. However, to the north and west, we will see quite blustery showers falling as snow over the high ground, and it should stay quite murky still across the southeast, but milder here for much of the day. That clearer weather then becomes more widespread through tonight. It should stay dry through much of the night for many central and southeastern areas. However, we'll continue to see those showers pushing in on that brisk northwesterly breeze, especially along coastal areas and over the high ground. It will be quite a windy night. As a result, temperatures will be held up across more northern and western areas, but in the south and east tomorrow we could see a touch of grass frost. And in the south and east, it should stay dry again through much of the day tomorrow and through northern areas to start. But the cloud will thicken as the afternoon progresses, and we'll see some drizzly rain arriving from the north and west that should persist into Thursday as well. It's got milder air though, so temperatures will be a little higher, but it will turn very windy. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Thanks, Annie. Now, still to come, under new guidance, teachers will not have to use preferred pronouns of children, and the presumption will be that they cannot change their gender. Has Kemi Badenoch put some sense back into the classroom? Do let us know. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News, the People's Channel, so do stay with us.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6 is Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 11 a.m. on Tuesday the 19th of December. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Ellie Costello.
Politicians' pay rise. MPs are set to receive a bigger pay hike than nurses and ambulance workers. The extra £6,000 would take their salary to over £92,000 a year.
Iceland volcano erupts. It's erupted in southwest Iceland after weeks of intense earthquake activity. We're going to speak to a volcanologist about the impact of the eruption of this size.
Schools trans guidance. Teachers will not have to use the preferred pronouns of children, and the presumption will be that they cannot change gender. This is under new rules announced this morning.
And Dame Esther Rantzen, she's revealed she's joined the assisted dying clinic Dignitas in Switzerland and is considering go there to end her life as she battles advanced lung cancer.
Well, we do love to hear from you on any of the stories that we are talking about today, especially on assisted dying and on Dame Esther Rantzen. Do you think there should be a free vote in Parliament? gbviews@gbnews.com. But first, let's get your news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Ellie, thank you very much and good morning. 1 minute past 11. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. A large volcano is erupting in Iceland, spewing lava and ash into the sky. The spectacle started north of Grindavik just after 10 o'clock last night. The nearby international airport is still open, but there are delays to both arrivals and departures as ash clouds the sky. These are live pictures coming to us for those watching on television. They'll be able to see lava continuing to bubble out of that 2.5-mile long crack in the earth. Iceland's government says it doesn't pose a threat to life, but curious sightseers are being warned to keep away. The government has published new guidance for schools on how to manage children who may wish to change their gender. Schools are advised to inform parents if their children say they'd like to change their gender identity. There's no obligation to allow students to socially transition or to provide gender-neutral facilities. Teachers are also given the choice to opt out of using a student's chosen pronoun if they have a reasonable objection. The Stonewall charity says the guidance doesn't consider the needs of trans and gender-diverse youth. Now, friends and colleagues are arriving for the memorial service of former Chancellor Alistair Darling. Those attending include former Prime Ministers Tony Blair and Gordon Brown and Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer. The service for the long-serving Labour MP is taking place in Edinburgh and will include tributes from his son and daughter, as well as Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves. Mr Darling died after a short spell in hospital at the age of 70. Council planning departments are expected to be put on notice today as the Housing Secretary cracks down on those accused of dragging their feet on new applications. Michael Gove will call out local authorities with a history of poor performance on building new homes. It's understood that some councils will be given 3 months to improve or risk having their powers stripped and developments forced upon them. Labour described Mr Gove's plan as truly through the looking glass, but Housing Minister Lee Rowley says houses are being built.
We go back to the early 2010s, it was about 100 to 150,000 a year. We're now into the 240,000 a year. The most amount of house building in the past 30 years has been in recent years. We've got more to do, there's no doubt about that, but we're going to hit the 1 million houses this Parliament, and we are increasing building even during times of economic challenge. And there's going to be challenge in the coming months, but the progress is still being made.
Dame Esther Ranson says she'll consider using assisted dying as she battles lung cancer. The broadcaster, known for starting the Childline charity, revealed in May that her cancer had progressed to stage 4. Speaking to the BBC, she revealed she's joined the Swiss organisation Dignitas, which provides doctor-supervised assisted dying. She's calling for a free vote in Parliament, saying it's important the law catches up with what the country wants. The old model accessing dental care in England is gone for good. That's the warning from a leading think tank. Most dentists are no longer taking on new patients in the NHS, with warnings the service is in decay and at its worst point in 75 years. According to the Nuffield Trust, spending on dental services has dropped by more than £500 million since 2015. It says the universal service is no longer offered by the NHS and recommends the government take some difficult decisions to ensure those most in need continue to receive basic care. Britain's joining an international coalition to protect ships as they sail through the Red Sea after a recent series of attacks. Houthi militants in Yemen are stepping up assaults on vessels as they pass through one of the world's most important shipping routes. They're backed by Iran and allied with the Hamas terror group. It's prompted BP to pause all its tankers in the area. The Royal Navy's HMS Diamond shot down a suspected attack drone at the weekend. It's understood the destroyer will be part of the new patrols. And mining workers who went on strike in the 1980s could have their convictions overturned as part of a bill to be presented in Parliament today. Thousands of miners were arrested in 1984 and 1985 after they walked out in a dispute with Margaret Thatcher's government. Scotland has already pardoned all those who took part in the strike. Owen Thompson, who's an MP for the SNP, wants the law changed in England and Wales too. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying Play GB News. Now back to Andrew and Ellie.
Thanks, Tatiana, and welcome back to Britain's Newsroom. Loads of you getting in touch this morning. So many emails in on assisted dying. And, of course, Dame Esther Ranson and her story. Margaret says we need to look to Canada to see the unintended consequences of legalising assisted dying. And that's what you were talking about earlier.
We were talking about that to Arlene Foster, because in Canada now, if you've got protracted, prolonged mental illness, that is a reason you can give to which I think is a bit worrying, to say the least.
Well, this is the argument, isn't it? It's the slippery slope argument that once you open it up to people with terminal illness, eventually others, particularly younger people as well.
And Stephen says, what's the difference between someone taking their own life by, say, drowning themselves, or committing suicide by throwing themselves off a high bridge or building, legally, which is legal, or choosing assisted dying in the comfort of their own home by a medical person? Difference is the law won't let you.
Yes. James says, yes, of course we should allow people with terminal illnesses and diseases to choose when to die. I was so distressed and felt hopeless and helpless when I watched my parents die in pain at the end of their lives. And Simon says we should support assisted dying, at least for those who are terminally ill. That does seem to be the consensus, doesn't it? The fact is there are some people that are going to Switzerland to exercise their decision. That's the reality, irrespective of the law in the UK.
Yeah, so that's all triggered by Esther Rampton. Now, big story, and it's going to gather momentum, is the fact that politicians, MPs, are going to receive a £6,000 pay hike next year, which will take their salaries to £92,700.
Yes, this comes after a series of public sector wage hikes, which will see MPs getting a bigger pay rise than nurses and ambulance workers.
Well, joining us now is Tory MP for Buckingham, Greg Smith. Greg, morning. Morning. Whether you like it or not, whether it's been proposed by an independent pay review body, IPSA, the public ain't going to like this. You're getting a bigger pay rise than nurses, and you're paid probably 3 times what the average nurse is paid already.
I'm not going to pretend that it's a helpful thing right now, that there's this suggestion that that's what MPs' pay is going to be increased by. I'm not sure that we should get an increase that's bigger than the public sector at large, but it's out of our hands. It's a system that we've got where MPs don't even vote on our own pay anymore. It is an it is an independent body that puts this forward, and it's not a final package yet. So there is a chance that IPSA, that's the independent body that pays us, looks at this in the new year, they may well move it down.
Currently, inflation is at 4.7%. If, as we believe the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt, by April, when this rise will kick in, inflation will be closer to 2%, so you'll be having a pay rise of more than 3 times the rate of inflation.
If that is what IPSA put forward in the new year. At the moment, and I appreciate that they've gone with the October figure the last few years, so yes, it's likely that that's what will come forward based on past pay terms. But this is not final, and IPSA, a body that is out of our hands. It's not something MPs can vote on or change or increase or decrease. IPSA may well come to a different conclusion in the new year based on the facts that you've just outlined.
Will you be accepting this pay rise?
If that's what the pay rise is, yes, I will. But it's not in my hands to determine what I am paid. It has been given to an independent body who have done it now for several years, and if that's what MPs are paid, then that's what, yes, will come into my bank account.
Does the system need to change then? Because, I mean, as you say, IPSA takes the October data. That's what they've been doing the past few years. That's why it currently sits at 7.1%. But as Andrew was saying, we could see inflation back down to 2% by April. Does that then need to change? Do we even need IPSA at all? We've had an email in from Peter who says, why do we have an independent body when you could simply have someone Google the average pay rise of public sector workers and go off that? This is typical government waste.
Look, IPSA has not been without its frustrations, but after what happened in the noughties, well before I was a Member of Parliament, there clearly needed to be a change to the system of the way MPs were paid, particularly in terms of the business costs for employing staff and buying equipment and things like that, because in the noughties and before that, MPs clearly abused that, and it needed to change. Do we need a different system that determines what pay should be across the whole public sector? Yes, probably, because at the moment we're in a position where everyone is negotiating for themselves, with the exception of MPs. And instead of having a more uniform pay increase that matches whatever the inflation numbers are, different numbers are being offered to nurses as distinct doctors, as distinct railway workers, as distinct firefighters, police, etc. I could go on, and it's probably time to have a look at whether there is a more uniform way we could do that.
Greg, of course, will say, I'm not taking the increase. But, of course, it doesn't matter to him because he's worth, via his wife's money, nearly £800 million. But that will make you lot look not quite so good.
Well, look, I don't criticise anyone for having become wealthy earlier in their careers. Good luck to them. That's, you know, what we want everybody to be as prosperous as they can be. But there is a question about who can enter politics. I wasn't independently wealthy before I was elected in 2019. I don't have much to fall back on. If I lost my seat, I'd have to get another job very, very quickly in order to pay the bills. I accept there are others that aren't in that position. But we do have to have this debate around whether politics is accessible for people from any walk of life to actually come in and offer their best to serve their country, to serve their constituents. And if the pay isn't at a point that is attractive to a lot of people, then it's not going to work. For me, I'm fine with it. I'm absolutely happy with the salary I get. But there are people out there that just won't do it.
Can we talk to you about one of your colleagues who's done very well financially out of the last few years in Parliament? That's Baroness Mone, Greg. £60 million profit. Her husband has banked in the Isle of Man Trust. Very nice, offshore, of course. She reluctantly admits she's a beneficiary, but probably only a beneficiary if her husband dies and her children benefit too. I mean, what a complete political disaster she is. Can she ever set foot in the House of Lords again? Should she be kicked out immediately?
I agree with you. It is a total mess. I've never actually met her, but clearly she has dominated the headlines for a long time. It's not a good look. Whether she'll ever enter the House of Lords again it's probably more of a matter for her as to whether she could face it. But yeah, I don't think she'd have a lot of legitimacy trying to contribute to a debate in there again.
She's a liar, isn't she? That's the problem.
Look, I'm not going to start banding around things like that, but clearly...
Well, she did admit that she lied to the press, but she said that's not the crime.
Andrew, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right on that. Clearly, disaster zone over the last couple of years as she's dominated the headlines. I don't think she'd have legitimacy trying to contribute to a debate in the House of Lords or ask questions or whatever it might be again. So I would politely suggest via the medium of GB News that she might want to consider whether she returns to the House of Lords.
No, but she's admitted to making £60 million in profit from PPE that couldn't even be used. It wasn't even fit for purpose. And the Lib Dems now calling for an urgent, independent inquiry into what happened at the Cabinet Office over these contracts. Is that something that you'd support?
I think we do need to understand what happened, but we need to understand what happened through the context of a world in abject panic and crisis, trying to get PPE to the front line, where there were limited supplies of it. And I think probably some of the usual checks and balances that would normally go with public sector procurement fell to the wayside just in that desperation, that panic to try and get PPE, not just into our own country, but into governments all around the world, trying to do it for their own health services and social care sectors and everybody else. So I think we do have to view it through the lens of just how urgent the situation was. But that's not to excuse the fact that billions of pounds worth of unusable PPE was procured. And we need to, let's hope that we don't have another pandemic. Let's hope we don't find ourselves in that situation again. However, clearly lessons have got to be learned so that we can be better prepared should that hit us again.
And should criminal charges be brought against companies who profited in the wake of the pandemic, and especially with products that weren't fit for purpose?
I think if it can be proven that people were deliberately supplying equipment that was not up to the job, that was not fit for purpose, that was not actually going to work or help anybody, then yes, that is outright fraud. And of course, those companies should be prosecuted. I fear that the burden of proof would be very difficult in that, and maybe some people were buying stuff that they, in good faith, thought was right and turned out not to be. But if it's proven that people were just simply providing duff stuff, then yes, of course they need to be held to account and brought to justice for that.
All right, that's Greg Smith. He's the Conservative MP for Buckingham. Thanks for joining us. Now, the Equalities Minister, Kemi Badenoch's been speaking about the new trans guidance in schools, which is coming. She's announcing today. We'll have a listen after the break.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth.
Your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
11:21, you're with Britain's News on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Ellie Costello.
Now, a huge volcano in southwest Iceland has erupted after weeks of intense activity. Iceland's Prime Minister has declared a state of emergency.
Already, 4,000 people have been evacuated from the area, and they've closed the nearby Blue Lagoon, you'll have heard of it, geothermal spa, which is one of Iceland's most popular tourist attractions.
Well, joining us now is reader in volcanology and risk communication, Dr. Carmen Solana. Very good to see you this morning, Doctor. So tell us what we're seeing. We're seeing these dramatic images coming to us live from Iceland, these plumes of smoke and also lava coming up from the surface. We've been expecting this for weeks, and last night this volcano erupted.
Yes, it is very exciting. It might look a bit
dramatic. I mean, it is very dramatic. It's very exciting. The images are incredibly, eye-catching. But in reality, it's not especially dangerous. Luckily, it hasn't occurred very close to any populated areas. And although the fissure apparently has been moving south a little bit, at the moment they're not especially concerned. The civil protection in Iceland is not especially concerned with any populated areas. In fact, you saw in the images quite a lot of cars moving around there.
Different, isn't it, Dr. Solana, to the volcano in 2010 in Iceland, which effectively led to the biggest close down of airspace in Europe since the Second World War?
Yes, this is quite different. I mean, the other volcano occurred underneath an ice cap, and because of the interaction between magma and water, there was a lot of steam, there was a lot of explosivity, and we saw these very high plumes that interacted with air traffic control. But the current eruption is not producing that very large ash-laden clouds, as you can see in the images. And in fact, the wind direction apparently is just blowing away from the airport. So I believe even the airport is still closed. It's still open for passengers to travel into Iceland and away out from Iceland.
OK, Dr. Carmen Solana, thank you very much indeed for your analysis there. Those dramatic pictures, those live pictures now from Iceland.
So we're finally going to get this trans guidance for teachers, which was supposed to have been, they started consulting this in 2018, and we're told teachers will not have to use preferred pronouns of pupils who want to socially transition.
Well, a few minutes ago, Equalities Minister Kemi Badenoch spoke on the new guidance.
Schools have asked for, because they are struggling with dealing with what is a relatively new phenomenon of children questioning their gender. This is a very serious thing, and social transitioning, as we've described in the guidance, is not a neutral act, and it is something that parents should be made aware of at the earliest opportunity.
Stonewall say there is considerable evidence that social transition improves the mental health of trans children and young people. Are you concerned that this guidance will push trans children to stay in the closet and impact their mental health or the mental health of the trans community?
No, that is not something I'm concerned about. And I should stress that we fundamentally disagree with Stonewall's analysis. We fundamentally disagree with their facts. The CAS review has shown that social transitioning is not a neutral act. It puts children on a medical pathway that can lead to irreversible medical decisions, the use of puberty blockers, and so on. But also, something that's really important to emphasize is that just because a child doesn't conform to gender stereotypes doesn't mean that they are the opposite sex. We shouldn't assume that because a boy likes pink or a girl likes football, that they are of the opposite sex. We need to make sure that schools understand what is going on, and that is what this guidance is there to achieve.
There is a risk, though.
OK, well, that's the Equalities Minister, Kemi Badenoch, speaking just a few moments ago on this new guidelines.
A bit of common sense. Ben Habib is here from the Reform UK.
Well,
common sense?
It is common sense. And funny enough, when I read it, I thought, great, a bit of common sense. But the reason you and I are both saying, all three of us are saying it's a bit of common sense, is because we're so used to hearing utterly balmy stuff coming out that this relatively, this something that we should take utterly for granted, for example, that you shouldn't assume just because a child says that they're not male, that they actually genuinely are not feeling male, that parents should be consulted on how children are treated at school. Of course. All of this stuff, which we should take for granted, we now regard as some kind of move towards common sense. And one thing I'll take issue with, and with Kemi there, is that, she said schools are finding themselves increasingly having to deal with the phenomena of students no longer identifying as their biological sex, or words to that effect. But, of course, it's the schools who are promoting the ideology, who are sowing seeds of doubt in the minds of our children. And I think, as many commentators on GB News have said before, this, in my view, is child abuse. You're actually promulgating an ideology that discombobulates a child at a very vulnerable age. And they even went as far as having gender-neutral toilets, for example.
And Ben, I'm going to interrupt you there briefly, because I heard a safeguarding officer at a school yesterday in Merseyside saying, well, they can say whatever they like with the guidance, we're carrying on with our gender-neutral news at a cost of £4 £100,000. Now, that's books and teachers and supply teachers.
Massive amount of money.
A massive amount. And I was just checked. I'm thinking, this because it's guidance from the government, it's not the law.
Yeah, and this is deeply concerning. I mean, if you... and it's not restricted to gender ideology, by the way. You know, if you're a white, working-class child in school, basically the message you're getting from the establishment is that you're white, therefore you're privileged, and if you don't recognise that privilege, you're racist. You're white, therefore your forefathers were slave traders, and you should be ashamed of the country in which you live and its history. You can adopt any number of genders you wish, and also your very existence threatens the planet because you are carbon emitters, all of you. And every time you do X, Y, and Z, if your parents drive a car that doesn't comply with the latest standards, you are damaging the environment and you're a problem. So a child coming through school now doesn't believe in their country, fears their own existence, thinks of their forefathers as having been criminals, lacks confidence, has aspiration completely drilled out of them, becomes the dependent blob I believe the state wishes to create, and is lacking entirely self-confidence. What sort of children are we creating?
Is this going to turn the clock back, what they're doing today?
Well, it's a step in the right direction, but, you know, I think we're living in Rome 400 AD, and the fact that we're debating something that should be self-evident shouldn't require a debate, that parents should be consulted, that Jack shouldn't be called Jill just because Jack says he should be called Jill, that transgender ideology isn't something that should be discussed or promoted in school. I think it should be banned. I think the talk about net zero should be banned in school.
Well, Ben, to that, what do you make of Stonewall's analysis, the LGBTQ plus charity? They've said that social transition in schools actually improves the mental health of youngsters, and they feel as though this sort of guidance would keep youngsters in the closet longer.
But, well, let's just get one thing straight. 0.4% of the population are identified as transgender. This is not a widespread problem. It is an ideology that the sort of progressive social left wish to promote. And it's part of a much bigger ideology, which I was trying to indicate when I discussed that hypothetical white child at school. It's, you know, it's challenging everything that which we take for granted and which gives us confidence as individuals and British citizens. That's what's being attacked here. It's nothing less than an attack on the nation state. And it's part of the attack, without wishing to digress too much, it's part of the same attack that Suella Braverman identified when she said in Washington, Western democracies are facing an existential threat. This kind of ideology, this kind of hijacking of our children's schooling, the promotion of net zero to the point that we fear to exist, the notion that the English language needs to be decolonised because it comes from an imperial past of which we should be ashamed, that our forefathers did nothing good other than make money out of slave trade. All of this is designed to attack the nation-state that is the United Kingdom, undermine its foundations, remove self-confidence from the British people, and give succour to this progressive socialist nonsense.
And on this, Miriam Cates, a Conservative MP, has been told she's potentially being investigated for a hate crime because she retweeted a fellow Tory MP saying of a candidate for the Green Party in Bromsgrove, I think it is, a man in a wig. Now, this is a person who identifies...
I know the one.
Who identifies as a trans woman. He's not transitioning, he's not taking drugs.
He's now Melissa or something.
But it's quite obviously a man with a wig on. She is being potentially investigated for hate crime. The police are part of this problem.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. The entire landscape is infected. And it's not something that's just become a fad. This is actually in the regulatory and legislative framework of the United Kingdom. The Equalities Act requires the promotion of people with immutable physical characteristics. Diversity, equality and inclusion, which I know we've discussed in the past as well, Andrew, requires the promotion of minority ethnic interests, minority religions, minority sexual preferences, etc., to the detriment of the majority. That's what it's about. It's about damaging the majority interest in this country.
I have to ask you 30 seconds. MP's pay rise, 7.2%.
It's completely wrong. IPSO was set up to ensure that MPs' pay rises track public sector workers. The average nurse in 2010 was paid £27,000 a year. She's now paid about £35,000 a year. That's a 25% increase. MPs have had a 40% increase since 2010. They are self-enriching. And the idea that they can point to IPSO and say it's an independent body, therefore we can't be held responsible, you are the parliament of this country. If you think IPSO ain't doing it right, and you think you're being overpaid because the rest of the public sector are not being paid as much as you are, then you have the ability to step up and make it right, and they're not doing it.
Would you accept it if you were an MP?
I wouldn't, actually. No, I wouldn't.
You wouldn't?
I wouldn't. No, I wouldn't. And I've got to the point now that if I ever hold public office again, I will not take a penny from the state. I'm going to put myself beyond it. And I can make that declaration now.
What, so you wouldn't take a salary?
I wouldn't take a salary, and I might have to take expenses if I'm flying on the state's business or whatever, but I would not take a stipend from the state in any public office I hold. I'm not prepared to be subject to this kind of nonsense. You know, if the MPs...
But that's because you're rich enough to do it.
I am very fortunate to be able to afford to do it, but I will do it. I will not take the shekel of a corrupted institution that is our parliamentary setup at the moment.
OK. Ben Habib.
Sorry, that's pretty striking.
And that's going to be in your manifesto for the next election.
Ben Habib, Deputy Leader of Reform UK, thank you very much indeed. Let's get the morning news headlines now with Tatiana Sanchez.
Ellie, thank you. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Dramatic scenes continue in Iceland as a large volcano spews lava and ash into the sky. The spectacle started north of Grindavik just after 10 o'clock last night. Thousands of people were evacuated from the area last month due to concerns over intense seismic activity. These are the pictures coming to us live. For those watching us on television, you'll be able to see lava continuing to bubble out of that 2.5-mile-long crack in the earth. Iceland's government says it doesn't pose a threat to life, but curious sightseers are being warned to keep away. Schools are being advised to inform parents if their children say they'd like to change their gender identity. Under new guidance, there's no obligation to allow students to socially transition or to provide gender-neutral facilities. Teachers are also given the choice to opt out of using a student's chosen pronoun if they have a reasonable objection. The Stonewall charity says it doesn't consider the needs of trans and gender-diverse youth, but Equalities Minister Kemi Badenoch says that's not the case.
Fundamentally disagree with Stonewall's analysis. We fundamentally disagree with their facts. The CAS review has shown that social transitioning is not a neutral act. It puts children on a medical pathway that can lead to irreversible medical decisions, the use of puberty blockers and so on. But also something that's really important to emphasise is that just because a child doesn't conform to gender stereotypes doesn't mean that they are the opposite sex. We shouldn't assume that because a boy likes pink or a girl likes football that they are of the opposite sex.
And Dame Esther Ranson says she'll consider using assisted dying as she battles lung cancer. The broadcaster who's battling cancer told the BBC she's joined the Swiss organisation Dignitas, which provides doctor-supervised assisted dying. She's calling for a free vote in Parliament to make it legal here in the UK. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
For exclusive, limited edition and rare gold coins that are always newsworthy, Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2708 and 1.1619 euros. The price of gold is currently £1,595 and 6 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 7,612 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thanks, Tatiana. Now, still to come, a certain Tonya Buxton has a lot to say about Kemi Badenoch's trans guidance for teachers. Been in the works for 5 years. You won't want to miss that.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Carson, this Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Britain's Newsroom, and we start in Iceland. These pictures coming live to us from the country. Those watching on television now will be able to see lava continuing to bubble out of that 2.5-mile long crack in the earth. The volcano there has erupted as of about 10 p.m. last night.
It is extraordinary, isn't it, the images?
Extraordinary
If you're listening on the radio, the images are extraordinary. You think it must be really dangerous and terrifying, but actually we're also seeing cars driving what seems to be fairly close by, because Iceland is a country that's had earthquakes and volcanoes before, and there is no threat to life. And we are not going to get the great smoke cloud that we had 12 years ago.
No, thankfully, yes, but the Icelandic government has warned sightseers to keep away.
Why would you have to warn them to do that? Why
Well, lots of people are driving towards the volcano to look at it, because of course it looks beautiful. But yeah, just watch from your TV screen, we would suggest, but they are absolutely incredible images coming out of Iceland this morning. Now, we're very pleased to be joined by two political commentators this morning, Tonya Buxton and GB News.
And you were trailed a little earlier
Nigel Nelson.
by Ellie about your views on Kemi Badenoch, who's finally spoken out, the Equalities Minister.
Me, I want to do a little dance, a little Kemi dance, because... But I mean, isn't it mind-boggling that this has now become its guidance for the schools? It should have been common sense. It should never have got to the stage where we have to wait for it to be guidance. And
why has it taken 5 years?
Why has it taken 5 years? But for me, who have been, very vocal about not agreeing with all of this absolute rubbish, I'm hoping now a lot of these, especially the young girls who are having gender dysmorphia, are now going to get the help they need, because what we're seeing is a lot of these young kids that think that they're in the wrong bodies do have anxiety, they do have mental health issues about other things. And now we can put this to the side and get to the depth of what's wrong with these kids. I mean, we know lockdown did a lot of damage, but I think at least now we can help these children rather than allow them to self-harm and damage themselves.
Do you not think some of it... I'm not a dad, so I don't know, I've never been a dad, but you're a mum. Do you not think some of it is just peer pressure?
Well, I think some of it, what I've seen...
One girl does it, so I'll do it.
There is that. There's also a thing that, a lot of the children, there's a huge percentage of children that are on the autistic spectrum who decide that they're in the wrong gender.
Right.
And it's a way of being allowed to come into a group, and it's a way of channeling, because you feel different and you're not quite sure why you're different. And I'm hoping now that it's not just going to be, we're not going to call you a cat, and we're not going to call you a he when you're a she, all of that stuff. It's going to be, well, why do you want to do this? Let's talk about what the reasons are, so we can actually help these kids.
But you would accept that some of those people will be genuine?
No.
You don't.
I think
no
very,
child
very
is genuine.
few. No, I don't think. I think very, very few. It's a fashion. Like when I was, there are fashions. There are self-harm fashions. There was anorexia fashion. It becomes like this kind of peer fashion that goes on. So I think the majority are not. It's a very, very rare thing to have someone born in the wrong body. And the way that we see it now in schools, it's like every single class has someone born in the wrong body.
Is that schools were actually seeing this. I mean,
But why didn't we see it when we were kids? What's changed?
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, I certainly didn't see it as a kid.
Well, none of it from my school.
When I talk to teachers nowadays, it happens an awful lot more frequently than one imagines. And usually schools just get on with it. So an example of a recent school, of a teacher I was talking to there was a boy who'd transitioned to a girl. The other pupils didn't bat an eye about it. That was all perfectly fine. And the only point where they had to actually change anything was that the girls didn't want her changing in their changing room. And that was the only difference that came about. The school accommodated it. Everything is fine.
So you're accommodating what could possibly be a mental health issue. So if someone is self-harming, which is a mental health issue, do you accommodate that? Do you accommodate someone who's suffering from anorexia? And this is my point. Now, at least we can have a look at the reasons that people feel the need to do this. But
the one thing they're not doing under this proposal is that GPs won't get involved. So what you can't get is that diagnosis of gender dysphoria to say this is genuine. So the argument is, GPs will be overwhelmed. Well, hang on. GPs are there to actually make decisions like this, and that's not going to happen.
They're not specialists in this thing. What we need to do is get mental health for children across the board. But, thank goodness that Tavistock Clinic is about to shut down.
Yes,
because it's done some horrible damage. I've been speaking to quite a few young people who are now young adults who were given medication by the Tavistock Clinic.
Just explain what it is. It's the country's only...
It's the country's only clinic that you can go and you can... I mean, they were giving out pills to children as young as 12 and 13.
I know.
And these pills, they're not reversible. It means that these children will never be fertile. They've messed with their hormones in a way that is irreversible. And then there are so many of these children that were going through depressive times. There was something else wrong with them. And they latched onto this gender thing because they thought that would fix them. And then they get to 18, 19, 20. They've messed up their bodies. And the detransitioners are more likely to commit suicide than those children that are not allowed to transition.
Tavistock went wrong, but the NHS is creating 2 new hubs to replace it. So then it's not as if we're suddenly saying, that Tavistock made a complete mistake, it was a complete error, let's get rid of it, we don't need it. There are two new centres that will be dealing with this in different parts of the country.
Maybe they have to be better regulated.
Well, that's
than
the point. The point about Tavistock was it wasn't well regulated, and there is the suspicion that that children were pushed into doing something they weren't ready for. And the whole thing, I mean, when it comes to something like this, an awful lot of common sense has to come into play. Everything should be a gradual process.
But Nigel, do you know that when there were certain children that wanted to change their sex and change their gender, they were saying that if you even had a conversation about not doing it and that it might be wrong, they were calling it conversion therapy, in the way that if, you know, back in the day when if someone was gay, they'd try and electrocute them. So they would say just by having a conversation with the child to say, look, are you sure this is right? What else is going on at home? What else has happened? It would be called conversion therapy and be treated that way. And this is where so many things went wrong with this.
Yeah, but I mean, this is where the school thing seems to be... I mean, I think broadly this is the right way forward, to give guidance to teachers.
Should it be law, Nigel?
No, I don't think it should, because what I think will be thrown up by this is often thrown up by such things, is that there'll be a lot of individual cases that suddenly you won't know how to deal with. So, for instance, I think that the teacher is there for the well-being of the child. That's the primary duty of the teacher. It is right that parents should be involved if their child is socially transitioning, so just wants to change pronouns, just wants to wear different clothes, then the parent should be involved, but only if that is in the interest of a child. If a child goes to a trusted teacher and says, look, the various sort of problems that Tanya's talking about there, I'm thinking this, I feel like that, you might rather talk to your teacher than you talk to a parent.
And you don't think parents should be informed?
Well,
of that
not
discussion?
at that stage. Not at that stage.
Nigel, you're just so...
Russell, I'm amazed by that.
Well, but who is a child to trust?
Their parents.
Yeah.
Well,
and
but what
I
if they
had
don't?
children not to be brought up by the state
don't?
or the teachers. Listen, we have to presume... I mean, I know this is not the case. I was a school teacher in Tottenham, so I'm very aware this is not the case. But we have to presume that most parents have their children's well-being at heart.
That most parents, that's absolutely true, and most parents would be told.
Extreme case where the child might be, you know...
Well, hang on. If you're just starting the conversation, and as a child you feel more comfortable discussing that with a teacher than with your mum or dad...
I absolutely think parents should be involved, depending especially how young the child is.
But you're almost saying that would stop the child having that conversation in the first place. So I'm not saying parents shouldn't be informed. I think that it should be obvious to parents.
At what stage would you get them informed?
Well, I mean, the whole thing is this goes back to the teacher bit, where the teacher decides what is in the best interests of the child.
But
so hence why going to your question, why it shouldn't be statutory, because if we made it into a law, it would make that part rather difficult.
Also, I don't think that teachers are sometimes fit to know what's best for the child in this environment.
No,
they might
nor
educationally, but
parents.
not socially in that way. And one of the things is the trans lobby was so strong and so frightening, it still is very frightening, that teachers who didn't adhere to what, you know, the gender of what the child wanted had to deal with the trans lobby. So at least that's stopping this from happening. You can go and you can be a teacher.
And you can imagine...
just be normal.
You can imagine there are lots of teachers who are breathing a sigh of relief, really, because they haven't had a clue about how to handle this. So at least now there is guidance. They know that they won't face sanctions if they're not using...
Yes, which is why broadly the guidance is good, and it's good the teachers have got the guidance. It is just the areas about, where is there a bit of leeway here and leeway there, depending on the individual circumstances you're dealing with.
OK, right. Nigel, let's have a look at this story in the Telegraph today. They're scrapping the Equality Act to tackle wokery. This is from Jacob Rees-Mogg.
It's never going to happen.
It is from Jacob.
It's never going to happen, sadly.
Who says wokery, it's wokery in legislative form. I haven't got a clue what he means by that. I mean, what do we want to scrap? Do we want to scrap disability rights? Do we want to scrap the idea of women getting equal pay, which they ought to have? There are a load of protected characteristics that come under the Equal Equality Act. It was one of Labour's final bits of legislation, and I think probably some of their finest. So now we have age, race, sex, transgender, all protected, and so it should be. Sexual orientation protected, maternity protected. These are important things that the Equality Act put into one bit of law. They're all over the place before.
It's gone too far, Nigel. It's gone too far. It's not an Equality Act. What it is a Preference Act now, and a lot of companies are treating it just like that. So, it should be, are you the best person for the job? That should it be. Not whether you've got the right gender, sexual orientation, religion, race, race. All of that should have nothing to do with whether you are fit for the job. The quotas have to be ticked now.
If you are disabled, there is now a duty on the employer to make sure you supply the kind of furniture and equipment to enable you to do your job. That is right, to force the employer to do that, so that disabled person can go up against somebody else and you decide who's best for the job, but best for the job with those various things that have to be there to help them do it.
I'm not disagreeing with that point, but the point is it's gone too far. It's so rare for me.
Rare agreement. My God, Tonya and Nigel have agreed on something.
But the fact of the matter is now, because of equality and diversity within companies, the best person often isn't getting the job because they don't tick the other box of these things: gender, sexual orientation, religion and race. And these shouldn't have to be part of whether someone gets a job or not. I understand there needs to be a certain amount of inclusion, but it's now exclusion of those that don't tick those boxes.
No, but the whole thing is trying to make a level playing field, and to level that playing field may require companies to do certain things. And say it comes down to race. If you're if you are interviewing a number of people for a job, it's pretty important you don't have an unconscious bias because you're looking for somebody who's a bit like you.
Do we need to abandon this law, do you think, Tonya? Or do you think
it's never going to happen.
It's never going to happen.
But I'd love to see it changed. I'd love to see it
rather than
changed.
abandoning it.
So I don't want to abandon it because there's some really good points in there, but it's gone too far. It's just gone too far.
Just very briefly, Tonya, just a nice story to end on. Lentils. They enjoy a good old chat, just like us.
They do. I love that because, you will know that if you have, there are certain products like onions. If you put onions together in a box, they'll start to sprout simultaneously together. And so there is an energy, there is a protein that's released that allows these vegetables and lentils and pulses to speak to each other.
How sweet is that? What do you think they talk about?
I don't know, but sometimes...
Ending up in the pot?
Sometimes I think their conversation might be a little bit more sensible than Nigel.
Yes, right.
Well, King Charles ought to learn the language.
Yes, exactly. But do you think they know they're going to end up in the pot before they talk?
I don't think it's that type of conversation.
Oh, OK. Just wondered.
They're buzzing off each other, a bit like us.
A bit like us, exactly.
Tonya, Nigel, thank you very much indeed.
Always a joy.
Thank you, Andrew. That's it from Britain's Newsroom for today. But up next is Good Afternoon Britain with Ben Leo and Emily. We'll see you tomorrow.
See you then.
Yes, coming up on the show, we have Ben Leo, of course, in for Tom Harwood with me this week. What have we got coming up?
Thank you for having me back. Massive show coming up, not least this volcano in Iceland. 3.5-kilometre crack in the earth with lava spewing absolutely everywhere. I want to know if I'm going to make my own holiday in 2 weeks.
And trans guidance for schools has finally dropped. We'll dig into it and find out what's going on there.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome to your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. After a rather damp start to the day for many of us, it will turn brighter through the afternoon, but it'll also turn colder and windier with some showers following behind. The rain through this morning has been brought by this weather front that will sink to the southeast through this afternoon and into the evening, and behind it we'll see much colder air being introduced, so it will be a colder night tonight. But for the afternoon, that will allow more sunshine to develop, especially across parts of Wales and the Midlands, as well as northeastern areas of England. However, to the north and west, we will see quite blustery showers falling as snow over the high ground, and it should stay quite murky still across the southeast, but milder here for much of the day. That clearer weather then becomes more widespread through tonight. It should stay dry through much of the night for many central and southeastern areas. However, we'll continue to see those showers pushing in on that brisk northwesterly breeze, especially along coastal areas and over the high ground. It will be quite a windy night. As a result, temperatures will be held up across more northern and western areas, but in the south and east tomorrow we could see a touch of grass frost. And in the south and east, it should stay dry again through much of the day tomorrow and through northern areas to start. But the cloud will thicken as the afternoon progresses, and we'll see some drizzly rain arriving from the north and west that should persist into Thursday as well. It's got milder air though, so temperatures will be a little higher, but it will turn very windy. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests, and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Tuesday, 19th of December.
fears for holiday flights. Iceland is in a state of emergency right now as an intense volcanic